Welcome to the Unlearn podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by Annastiina Hintsa, CEO of Hintsa Performance. Now, Hintsa Performance is a world-leading, evidence-based coaching company that helps top athletes and business professionals achieve sustainable success. Their methods are driven by science and guided by people who have been rigorously tested in some of the most challenging business and sporting environments. I first met Stina at the Formula One Grand Prix in Monaco, where her team worked with over 50% of the Formula One drivers, as well as many Fortune 500 CEOs, leading consultancies and not-for-profits to evaluate performance. I was truly inspired by her approach, most notably with the renowned athlete Haile Gebrselassie. In this episode, Stina delves into the systems, structures and methods they've adapted to help individuals achieve peak performance in both business and sports. It's a captivating conversation filled with practical systems, tactics and tools that you can use to enhance your leadership skills and achieve maximum potential, but most importantly, explores who you are and how you want to define yourself. So let's get started and understand how it began for Stina on her own journey. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode and it greatly supports our podcast.
I didn't start Hintsa. Hintsa was founded by my father. We're a high-performance coaching company, and my father was a doctor. He was an orthopedic surgeon who ended up working with athletes, who had this fascination with athletes and human performance. And what makes human performance, what makes you not just peak, but what makes you capable of actually staying at the top sustainably, race after race, weekend after weekend. Imagine repeating that Monaco experience, not the kind of champagne experience that we had, but like the actual race experience.
I can imagine that pretty easily, actually, Stina, now you say that, but yes.
But imagine like repeating that weekend after weekend, 24 races in the calendar, flying around the world. And it's actually, with that calendar or schedule being made for TV rights rather than human performance, it's pretty brutal. And my father was really sort of, fascinated about what makes a human being capable of doing that over and over again. And capable of not just doing that, but capable of doing that and being genuinely happy as a person, balanced. And that was sort of like what sparked his interest. The story obviously goes even further back, but we can talk about that later. For me, you kind of alluded to it. I worked with my dad early days. I was employee number 3 in the very, very early days, like early 2000s, helping him run training camps for drivers and teams in Finland. I then went to do my own thing. I did McKinsey. I actually really enjoyed it. I did micro-entrepreneurship in Guatemala and all sorts of...
just great opportunities in the world, different things.
Very, very different things. And the inflection point, which I did actually recognize as an inflection point in my career, was when my father got sick. So he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2015, passed away 16 months after. And it was a turning point for me personally. It was a turning point for us as a family. It was a turning point for the business. And all of those were pretty clear inflection points. It was a very natural, it wasn't even a decision actually for me to join the business at the time. It was just something that I thought, and my father also thought, of course. We had been always sparring together already sort of early days. Throughout my career, he would ask me stuff about business. I'd talk to him about my own burnout, et cetera, and it had always been we always had a close relationship, but also kind of a respectful relationship. Him respecting what I knew, and me obviously massive respect for his work. So not really even a decision that I've had to make since multiple times, very consciously, because this is not a business you come into and then just stay in because it's always, champagne on a yacht. It's entrepreneurship at its crudest. Definitely something I've had to since think about very consciously and make decisions about very consciously over and over again.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to hear these stories, right? Like you say, being employee number 3, spending your time there in the beginning, spending your own time to explore what you want to learn about yourself and other opportunities. And as you say, it almost sounds like a mission as soon as that opportunity obviously came through hard circumstances. And yet for you, I can even just see your reaction. It wasn't even a question of, am I taking this on? It's sort of like, right, that's an amazing sort of really feeling for many people. Like when I often talk to folks who've been early in companies and seen the company evolve and someone else had to take over, but with the added sort of spice of it being a family business and something that's obviously very close to your entire family, to take something like that on, even that is sort of fascinating. So as you sort of started to dive into that situation then, right, you're taking on a business, it's working with high performance athletes, some of the most highest performing in the world. These, I think, you'll tell me exactly what percentage of the world's Formula One drivers work with you, but I know it's above 50 if I remember correctly. So like, these are not sort of, people who they're very, very skilled. They're very, very focused, and that's just one cohort that you work with. Obviously you work with lots of business leaders as well, and how you've grown the business your father initially began. So talk to us a little bit about yourself then, right? Like, you're certainly not only working in this domain, you're the CEO, you're the founder, taking this thing forward now. What were some of the things you had to unlearn as you started to not only embrace entrepreneurship, but teaching how to build high performance individuals, culture, teams? What were some of the things that maybe when you went back into that role, that you were like, okay, this is how we need to do it? And yet, the entrepreneurial journey, I feel like I've certainly had many moments where I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is exactly how we have to do it. And only for me to have to realize it was the counterintuitive thing that worked. So what were some of those things that sort of jumped out at you as you started that journey?
I think the biggest learning for me has been really what Hintsa is all about. And it is about, how do we actually define high performance? What does high performance actually mean? And how can you actually get to that sustainable high performance? And our mission is to help people live better lives, and as a consequence, perform better. And that it sounds very simple, but it is actually a pretty fundamental shift in mindset that I know I had to make. And I have to remind myself about, and many of our athletes, but in particular business leaders that we work with, have actually struggled to make. Because it is the way that I I grew up in consulting, as an example, and the way that a lot of entrepreneurs also work, or business leaders work, is, we work really, really, really hard, and then living a better life, looking after ourselves, looking after our families, etc., etc. It's something we look forward to, over the weekend, or when we retire in some cases. And that sort of the notion that my father, he actually developed a method working with long distance runners in Ethiopia, and the notion that he came about there was that better life leads to better performance. And he went as far as to say that as success is a byproduct of well-being. First comes well-being, first comes better life, and then your performance is a byproduct. And that mindset shift actually is pretty hard to unlearn even. Yeah. It's not the way we're brought up with.
Yeah, look, it resonates with me instantly for one reason, right? It's funny enough, I was writing a blog the other week about entrepreneurship and this notion of running towards the fire, right? Stuff happens. There's always challenges. Startups are just constant challenges. But you also need to run towards the fires rather than away from them. And, people often ask me then, well, why do you like doing that? Why, is it because you think one day, one of these startups will explode and then you can retire and, drink mojitos in the Caribbean? And I'm like, well, that's not actually what reward is for me. Like, sitting on the beach for 3 days is nice, but then I want to do something else. The reward for me, I've actually found, is the personal growth that comes from working with interesting people doing hard things. and I grow as a person, as I grow as I develop in my skills. But the basis for what helps me do that is always exercising, eating well, and having peers, friends, and a network around me that can that sort of invigorates me even when the times are tough. So it's fascinating for you to hear you talk a little bit about that. So could you just help me understand a little bit of that thinking, because it's, again, intuitively that's what I'm responding to, but you're obviously systematically thinking about this. So yeah, help me understand it.
So I love how you, by the way, immediately took it also to that moment of hardship, or that moment where things actually get tough, because that is when you realize whether you have. It's so intuitive whether you actually have something in your reserve or in your battery, or whether you're running at sort of like at low battery constantly, at 20% constantly, or even
Yeah.
at 80%. It makes a difference. So the method that my father developed, it works in two ways. So one is around, the holistic nature or integrated nature of all of those different elements that you already touched on. They all have an impact on one another. We talk about physical activity, we talk about nutrition, sleep and recovery. We talk about mental energy, which is massive, encompasses a lot of different things. We talk about general health and biomechanics, actually. And then around those, you can imagine those elements in a circle. That circle is really, I mean, it's like a wheel. If one of the parts is, low, the wheel stops spinning ideally. You need all of them in balance. I am an economist by background. I think about it as an optimization equation, or a multiplication as opposed to an addition or a sum. And the other thing about that model is that it actually starts inside out. So in the center of that circle is what my father called the core, which is essentially three questions. Do you know who you are? Do you know what you want? And are you in control of your life? And those three questions are what keeps that wheel spinning. Those three questions are what helps you determine and define what success actually means for you. And I think that's another thing, like not a lot of people spend time really thinking about, how do you define success? And you had, that was a beautiful example that you just shared. You have redefined success in your own terms. This is what it looks like for you. This is why you're doing it. For some of the Formula One drivers, it might be sort of very easy to start with. I want to win the world championship. But when you kind of, the question that my father used to ask them was like, where are you when you're not a Formula One driver? Because that's actually not, that possibility is very, very real for all of them every single weekend.
Absolutely. Yeah. And such a short period of doing at that level as well, right? It's very rare that many people probably go beyond 3-4 seasons, I imagine.
It's very rare for somebody to be there like, Alonso, who's over 40, or Lewis, who's 40. That's very, very rare, as you said. So for a lot of them, the retirement age actually comes quite quickly. And then the question is, who are you when you're not a driver? And a lot of times your identity, even for business people, especially for athletes, it's tied
Oh, it's
to the
massive.
sport. So it's
But I see
that is
this
a big
all the
part.
time, even like in the business world, as you're alluding to, right? Like folks, when they get to the later stages or decades of their career, like trying to figure out. I had John Marchante, who's the former CIO of Vanguard, like one of the largest financial institutions in the world, and now he's not he's the former CIO, and he talked a lot about the thing that keeps him ignited, lit up, is actually giving back to the community, mentoring the next generation of CIOs, right? That having community, like still being involved in technology, like these things are massive for him in terms of helping him sort of focus what he wants to do when his identity of, one of a Fortune 50 global CIO, like that's how he did the job for 23 years, like that's how people know him. So it's this is real, and even myself, I constantly do tie a lot of my own identity to what I'm working on right now, this startup, this team, this business. What if it works out? What if it doesn't? What will I do then? These are questions I think many of us struggle with, for sure.
And it's not like it wouldn't be a part of your identity. I think that's also another thing. Like I'm not, we're not saying it shouldn't be a part of your identity. My father used to talk about that. So can I tell the origin story of Hintsa very briefly to you?
But of course, that's why we're here. Yeah, let's hear it all. I'm all about origin stories. That's what I want.
So we're obviously most known for Formula One, and we've been working in the sport since 1996. But my father, before he started working with Mika Häkkinen, he was actually a fishery doctor in Ethiopia, working with in very poor communities, responsible for different development agency work in East Africa. But then he was also the chief medical officer of the Finnish Olympic Committee, and fascinated about sports. So he ended up working with Ethiopian athletes, long distance runners, including Haile Gebrselassie, who some may recognize still, but a legend, an absolute legend in long distance running. And my father used to so the whole model, whole idea of everything being integrated, this holistic model, that was really by the outcome of my father watching Haile train, the outcome of my father, watching him live his life. But the real thing that stuck with him was when Haile actually faced some setbacks. And it was around the Athens Olympics when he had a problem with his Achilles tendon and had to be operated. So he flew to Finland to be operated by my dad and his team. And it's a really, really high stakes Achilles tendon to operate on. And everybody, including my dad, were a little bit nervous.
Absolutely, yeah, high stakes, yeah.
Yeah, very high stakes. I mean, it's basically your career, and not just your career. There's a lot more that rides on it. And it was Haile's reaction when he saw that everybody was kind of stressing out, and doctor sweating a little bit. He said, "Doctor, don't worry, it's just running." They were literally rolling him into the operating theater, and he's like, "Doctor, don't worry, it's just running." And my father realized at that moment that it wasn't, if you go back to those three questions, if you go back to that sort of question of identity, running was a massive part of his identity. He talked about himself as a runner. It was his passion. He was the happiest when he ran. Like my father used to talk about how he would always run with a smile on his face, 4 a.m. in the morning. It was only a part of his identity. He had other pillars that he could fall on when faced with setbacks, when faced with difficulties. He a super active member in his community, mentoring young athletes, a businessman, family man, etc., etc. So he had other pillars in his identity that helped him at a time when, the part that arguably defined him the most to the outside world was at risk. I thought that was a beautiful story, or a beautiful reminder of how whatever you're passionate about should be.
It's so good. Yeah, it is so good. Because instantly as you're sharing that, like my mind goes to when I'm, like I say, when I'm having tough times, right? And entrepreneurship, starting businesses, working in big businesses with high stakes projects, being an athlete, whatever it is, there's moments where you have to face adversity, and it's hard, but perspective is probably, I think, one of the most powerful aspects to hold on to. Again, it's funny we're talking about this in this blog I wrote literally only like a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things I think about is maybe, this venture studio I'm building, Nobody Studios, right? We've had many moments where you're on this sort of trajectory and you hit a blip, right? And it's like the stock market. It just goes boom, down to the floor. You lose 40, 50% of your momentum, whatever it is. And those moments are incredibly testing and hard, where you're sitting there going, well, how are we going to find our way out of this? And like I said, a lot of the things I've always found is like making a little bit of progress each day. Think about the tough things, make them really small, and can I just make a little bit of progress on what I'm trying to do? But the other thing that's really, really powerful is the perspective. Because when I think of the moment that I'm currently in, I sometimes visualize this idea of like 10 years, or the company's been going for 4 years. And you know what? There's been these blips that have just dropped, just like the stock market or something else. But, we've crawled our way back out of it over time, and when you look at even the 4-year horizon of Nobody Studios, or, companies like yours that have been going for many years, I'm sure you've faced many moments like that. They're just blips. They become these tiny little blips when you look at a 10-year, 20-year horizon. And, I think that perspective as well, along with what you shared about Haile Gebrselassie story, is a very, very powerful mindset to have, because, it's very easy to just go down with the dip and and keep going, and ultimately it's on you to find the bottom of the market and climb your way back up, right? It's
Yeah, definitely. And it's sort of the idea of that blip and that setback. It doesn't define you. It doesn't define your worth as a person. You have other, and having those other things to help you take that perspective, to step back and gain that perspective, because actually that's easier said than done. If you are mentally, physically, emotionally at a drained state, if everybody else with you, around you, is in that same bubble, actually taking that step back is not very easy. And we know that and again, this is all interconnected, when we are physically and mentally exhausted, tired, stressed, our perspective literally narrows. It becomes harder and harder to take the step
absolutely
back and see
right.
the big picture.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So as you've done this now for many, many years, right? Like, you obviously took the business and you have grown it to, I think you've got 65 plus trainers now and all over the world doing a huge amount of impactful work, right? Like, you're so much of this world, I'm only imagining, has become more technology enabled, like real time analytics,
Yep.
psychometric testing. Like people have all these like little micro dots, if you will, of things that they've experimented with. You mentioned this wheel that you've sort of created. So what do you think are some of the things as an industry that we need to unlearn about high performance? Like what are some of the sort of, counterintuitive, maybe myths that you feel need to be debunked? Because I always love hearing folks like that sort of share those types of things.
I'm gonna be super boring. I think the industry is moving forward, and it's really exciting. And if you think about so we have about 60 pack coaches in sport. We have another 200 approx in corporate, and it is really and those two have a lot in common. There are also things that don't translate necessarily as well. A corporate executive does not have to be monitoring everything as an athlete does. It doesn't. That just wouldn't make sense.
So I don't need my VO2 max to run a meeting very well, right? I'm going to be okay.
You do need endurance, and you do need that kind of peak endurance. You do need sort of the long. You do need the long. You do need the high intensity. You do need you need the strength and the physical activity, kind of general daily activity. So you do need that. I think what a lot of executives, when we talk about like, hey, so we work in sport and now we're going to work with you, they come to the program or they come to us expecting that we're going to give them this magic pill, like, we're just going to start, you're going to start using the CGM, and then we're going to find out how we're going to, they expect a magic pill. They expect something, marginal that's going to change everything. And in reality, I think there's two things that a lot of them are surprised by when they come into the program. One is that it's actually very much about the basics. It goes back to the basics, and it's not that strict. I'm not going to prescribe you a diet that you won't be able to actually follow through on. Rather, we're going to be talking about like, hey, can you modify the way you eat a little bit more so that you're 80% there, 80% of the time, and then the rest, you will have your business dinners and you will have your whatever. That's okay, that's fine. But let's try to make the rest of the time 80% there. And it's actually more sort of like simple stuff, or sleep, another example that comes up all of the time with the execs we work on. It's crazy how many of us think that we can actually do with 6 hours per night or something. It still goes around, and I'm perplexed by it. We've talked about this for such a long time. Like, people still think that. In reality, we know that has a direct impact on our cognitive performance on a day-to-day basis. We know that it's cumulative. So sleeping for 6 hours per night for 2 weeks in a row actually impacts the impact on your performance is equivalent, cognitive performance, mind you, is equivalent to staying up for 2 nights in a row.
Listen, that's music to my ears to hear stuff like that, because I am a sleeper. There is no doubt about it. I am like, from the early days, I was like 10 p.m. I am out. If I can go earlier, last night I even went to bed at 9 p.m. because I didn't want to watch TV. So I'm really proud of myself there. The other thing that really resonates, and I've heard this a little bit as well from Peter Attia as well, this notion of like trying to be 80% there
Yeah.
rather than trying to be 100%. This is one of the things I feel like I hear a lot in you've got to have the perfect diet. You've got to be perfect. But this notion is you're sharing too as well, like being like 8 out of 10 consistently rather than trying to be 10 out of 10 every day, I think is such a great message for people because, naturally folks I find when they're in high performance, high octane, whatever it is, work, hobbies, whatever, right? This sort of like, I've got to be perfect. And to me, that actually drives more negative behaviors because it's almost like this narrowing happens, as you were describing earlier, where there's no forgiveness, if you will, for like saying, I didn't get this right, or I'm going to eat a chocolate bar today because you know what? I want one. And I don't eat them every day. Whatever these small things are, right? I think it's a really great lesson is that if you can be consistently around 8 out of 10 or every day, where you can get to is very good. That's great. It's not perfection we're going for every time here. I think there's a great message.
Exactly. Not perfection. Perfection, it's one of those, the attention to detail and striving to, high ambition drive is one of those strengths that, again, when overused, actually becomes a weakness. And I think that's exactly what happens to a lot of that. So a lot of the folks that we work with are when think about themselves as, maximizing every single area of their lives, top 1% in everything. So now I'm going to do top 1% in triathlon as well and golf. And, I'm going to run marathons and do CrossFit and do X, Y, Z and have the perfect diet and the perfect time in my life and the perfect body and the perfect CV and business and whatever. And that's just not possible. None of us can be maximizing at all time. If you think about athletes, again, like another kind of key lesson, I think, is around this whole notion of periodization. An athlete is not performing at their max, at their peak all the time. Rather, they time their peak through those peak moments when you actually need it. And then the other times, it's actually much more polarized. You're actually training at fairly low intensity for most of the time. And I think with sort of corporates, what we see, or business leaders, hey, myself included, I'm here too. I'm in the same boat. I have to constantly keep on learning these lessons and reminding myself of this. We get stuck in the middle gear. We get stuck in this kind of like execution mode where we're constantly just,
Yeah.
we're not at our peak. We're also not recovering and resting. We're at this middle gear, checking our emails, responding, executing. But when the time comes when we would actually need to get to that high gear, get to the peak performance, we actually can't because we don't have the resources to do it anymore. Because we never spend time in the recovery. And I think, or low intensity. And I think that sort of notion of periodization and polarization in work life is also something that I could definitely take from the athletes.
Great. All right. I'm booking another holiday off this week. I'm going to ring the team and say, that's it. This is the way to do it. But it is fascinating for you to, like to systematize this, because I think sometimes people feel it intuitively. I need a break. I'm exhausted. I need to take a week off. And then often a lot of folks never do that, right? They get trapped on the treadmill. There's a meeting coming up. I can't do this. I gotta push through. So I think these are all great messages. I think of one of my old colleagues, Ange. She was hilarious. I would see her on the 1st of January every year and she'd be like frantically at her laptop, and I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I'm booking all my holidays for the year right now. I'm booking every single day. I've got it all booked off. And I'm like, why are you doing that? She goes, because if I don't book it now, I won't do it. And, I'll make excuses. I'll do all these things. And it doesn't matter. I can always cancel it. But I'm just booking it now, so I have these things in place. And it was one of these things I was always like, that is genius, and I need to be doing more like that. I've tried to get a little bit better. I am the holiday champion in our house. My wife works crazy amount of hours and time, but I'm normally the one battling for let's take a holiday here. We're generally good when we get it done, but. These are the little habits I think that just, always remind me going, I need to be more like Ange because she's got it done 1st of January guaranteed. She's got her holidays booked for the year or just a time booked to when she's going to be away. And, it was always sort of an inspiration for me.
I think that's great. And I think it's sort of again, throwing on the athletes, they work in different cycles. They work in sort of macro cycles. And your holiday, booking your holidays is a macro cycle. That's like actually taking proper time to detach. But then you should be also thinking about it on a weekly basis. Like, do you have times off when you detach during the week? When you deploy different mental recovery strategies during the week? And then are you making sure that you're doing that on a daily basis, on a kind of micro level? Like, what's your sort of detachment ritual when you get off from work?
Great.
There's some really interesting research, by the way, around it looks like the real detachment from work happens between your last email and your first, which is pretty scary. Because hey, I have a young kid, I have a 2-year-old. I do the second shift quite regularly. But what the research is suggesting, it's not like you shouldn't do it. You should work as, you're optimizing for a much more complex equation. But it does sound like, or it does seem like the cost or the price for that last email is actually higher than if you push through until whatever 6 p.m. or whatever it is for you.
Again, more great tips. I'm literally going to sit down and start planning my year, my month, my week, and my day now for these little periods. Listen, Sonia, looking forward, right, for you, what are you most excited about now as we think about the industry and the things that are starting to happen?
I mean, I think all of us are in the same place. We're looking at sort of at the technology and how fast it's moving forward right now, and what are the impacts going to be for us as an industry as well. I'm actually more curious about how are we as humans ready for that shift? And what's the sort of, not the technology side, definitely interested in that too, but I'm thinking how do we make sure that we as humans are ready for that shift? Because that shift that we're looking at with all of the Gen AI and everything, it's just happening so fast that it's almost hard to comprehend. At the same time, I feel like us as leaders, professionals, we are a lot of the leaders that I speak to right now are not in their best place to take on that shift, to navigate that change, to lead that change. Because we have been sort of going from one crisis to another for I don't know how many years now. I certainly feel like since COVID, it's been sort of one wave after another. Like honestly, it has been pretty constant since COVID. And I'm thinking, what I'm excited about is, God, I wish us as leaders could be in that right place, mentally, physically, emotionally, to be able to actually help, to be able to navigate that change, but it will also help our teams navigate that change in a way that's sustainable, in a way that helps us, puts us in the right place and frame of mind to be able to learn, to be able to embrace, to be able to challenge, to be able to be creative, and you know collaborate, connect, be there for one another emotionally, because we're going to need all of that. And if we're feeling that we've just come out of another wave and tackling another issue and sort of constantly stretched, we're in trouble.
I see this a lot, especially as we're building companies, right? So much of this idea of how artificial intelligence and these massive data insights and data that's being collected about people and how it's used and how it's interpreted and even understood is it's a massive challenge for folks. Many business leaders, I even notice in our teams myself, right? Like the way we communicate with people has changed massively. You even alluded to this, doing emails at 10 p.m. at night or 11 p.m. and 5 in the morning and all these, every device is beeping and that's you. And, how do you show up in a good way, especially when you're a leader, when, you've had a tough day and somebody's pushing a tough question on you, right? Or these broad forums that you have to reply in and deeply think about how you reply, because they can have massive impacts when there's 1,000 people them on an asynchronous communication. Like these are the tough parts of leadership, to always be able to show up in as best a possible way as you can. I think, I'm certainly struggling with those moments where, I spend half an hour writing a 2-line sentence on a Slack message because I'm like,
Yeah.
many people are going to see this, and how do I make sure that, the answer is that I give is, it has integrity to it. It's factual.
Yeah.
It's fair. Like that is a huge cognitive load as I'm rushing out to pick up one of my kids or some catastrophe has happened where the boiler is blown up. Whatever these things are, like this is the world we are living in now. And, again, it's one of those reasons I like you talking about this idea of getting to 8 out of 10 every day is great, because nobody can be a 10 out of 10 every day. The wheel that you talk about of all these different components that are part of it, but ultimately these core questions I just think are fascinating about, who you want to be, who are you, all these things that really are so grounding and give perspective, which I think is just, amazing lessons. And, Stina, I'm grateful for you coming on and sharing these lessons with us and your own journey. And it's a huge inspiration for, I'm sure, many folks. And, I'll really encourage them to go check out, Hintsa Performance. I'll make sure we get some of these great reports that you mentioned as well and put in the show notes. But, thank you very much. And if there's one thing you think somebody could try maybe tomorrow to start, embracing their performance a bit better, what kind of things would you suggest?
I always do say start with the core questions, and do start with that. Do you know who you have a real think of? Who are you as a person, not just you at work or your job title? How do you actually define success? What is it that you really want? What are the different components of success for you? And then the final questions around sort of control, which is as much as it is about, what are the things that we can control and we can influence? What are the little steps that you can take, even when things seem to be falling out of control? And, what's the one more step that you can take? But then it's also about, what are things I cannot control? What are things that are, letting go of the things that are out of your span of control or influence? And, there are those too. I think those are sort of the things that I would start with. On a more concrete level, my personal favorite is the 4 mental recovery strategies, which I try and kind of make sure that I hit. The first one is actually relaxation. Going back to that 8 out of 10, or being kind to yourself, compassionate. It's relaxation is your method to chill, or however you want to define it. It's passive. It's what helps you genuinely relax. The second one is around mastery. So mastery is around, if relaxation would be watching. Did you ever watch Queen's Gambit?
Yeah,
it was a show on Netflix.
Yeah, I became an instant chess favorite overnight. And also day drinking got quite popular for a few episodes as well. But yeah.
Not the day drinking necessarily, but if you did pick up chess after Queen's Gambit, that would be mastery. Learning a new skill. Learning something that's challenging yourself in a way that's not related to your work necessarily, but mastery of a new skill. Dancing is amazing. Chess. Learning a new language. Something that's not necessarily related to your work. The third one is around detachment. So that's the email example, and a detachment ritual. For me, it's when I go home, when I open my door, when I touch that handle, I ask myself, who is the person that I want to be when I enter this room?
Great.
When I open the door, who is the person I want to be? And it's literally a millisecond, or it's a second. It's just taking a breath and realizing that it's not actually the person that I'm right now, who is in the best place to greet my son. And then the fourth one is around control and autonomy. During your week, do you have times when you actually spend your free time the way that you want to, just for you? A lot of us have a lot of other responsibilities outside our work too. And it's not uncommon that we actually spend our time mostly in service of others. So thinking about whether in your week you have time when you get to spend your free time just as you wanted to. That's the fourth one.
Great. Well, look, these are, you've given us so much food for thought here. Lots of great little prompts and systems and exercises to do. So I'm literally going to start doing them, when I can get my free time to do more of these things. But look, thank you so much for sharing so much of your own story and your the systems you're using to help people be successful. I'd really encourage everybody, check out what you're doing. We'll put everything in our show notes so you can get in touch, follow your work and everything. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Barry, for having me. It was good chatting.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com.
and we'll see you on the next episode.